decades of soil, as if the ground itself had tried to keep it hidden. Jonas Keene, a battle-worn veteran, tightened his grip on the crowbar in his hands. Beside him, Atlas, a German shepherd with eyes like sharpened steel, let out a low growl. Luna the husky paced nervously, her breath visible in the cool autumn air. Whatever lay beneath that mound wasn't meant to be disturbed. The Ozarks stretched endlessly around them, rolling hills wrapped in fading greens and burnt orange. The air carried a damp, heavy scent of moss and pine needles, but under it lingered something sour, something metallic, acrid. Jonas felt it in his bones. This wasn't just old junk left to rust. This was a secret buried deep, waiting for the wrong hands, or maybe the right eyes, to uncover it. For years Jonas had tried to leave the battlefield behind, but the war still followed him in memories and restless nights. Atlas had been his partner in combat, Luna his solace on long, lonely walks. Together they were his family, his lifeline. And now all three of them stood on the edge of a discovery that could shatter the fragile peace Jonas had built. With a grunt, Jonas wedged the crowbar into the seam of the rusted door. The sound that followed was horrific, a screech like bone against metal, a howl from the earth itself. Atlas barked once sharp and urgent. Luna whimpered, then froze, staring at the widening crack. A rush of foul trapped air escaped, heavy with decay and time. Jonas stepped back, his heart pounding. What was inside this buried chamber, and why had it been hidden for so long? Join Jonas Keene, Atlas, and Luna on this journey. Subscribe now so you won't miss what comes next. The moment the rusted door gave way beneath the crowbar, the world seemed to hold its breath. The screech of metal still echoed in my ears when a wave of foul air spilled out, heavier than the mist that clung to the hills. It was the kind of smell that makes the back of your throat tighten, decay, mixed with rust, like time itself had been rotting in that dark space. Atlas snarled, the sound low and guttural, every hair on his back standing on end. Luna pressed closer to my leg, her bright blue eyes fixed on the gap, as if the shadows inside might reach out and drag us under. I steadied myself, though my heart hammered against my ribs. Years in uniform had taught me to keep moving forward when instinct screamed to back away. My fingers tightened around the crowbar as I widened the gap inch by inch. Each grind of rust was like a scream clawing out of the earth. I told myself I'd faced worse, but I knew that was a lie. War had taught me what men could do to one another. What lay buried here might be something different, entirely, something forgotten, something that wanted to stay forgotten. The opening was wide enough now to let me slip through if I wanted to. The beam of my flashlight sliced into the blackness, but revealed nothing except a wall of dust swirling like smoke. I coughed into my sleeve, then leaned back, filling my lungs with the clean forest air. Atlas, whined ears, tilted forward. He wanted me to stop. Luna's paw tapped the ground anxiously, her nose twitching. They were telling me the same thing in their own ways, don't go in. But I'd never been one to leave a door unopened once I'd cracked it. I knelt closer, pressing my ear toward the opening. Silence, but not the natural kind. It wasn't the hush of wind through trees or the quiet padding of deer in the distance. This was the silence of something sealed away where even sound had been smothered. I slid my hand along the cold edge of the steel-framed flakes of rust, catching under my nails. The craftsmanship was deliberate. This wasn't a farmer's safe or some abandoned piece of logging equipment. It was something built to last, built to withstand both time and discovery. I pulled back and looked at my dogs. Atlas held my stare, his amber eyes unwavering, waiting for my choice. Luna shifted beside him, her tail, lowered ears pricked, caught between fear and loyalty. "Easy," I whispered, brushing a hand over each of their heads. "We've come this far. We finish it." I braced myself, shoved the crowbar deeper, and forced the door wider. The hinges groaned in protest, then finally surrendered with a thunderous crack. The steel slab slammed inward against something solid. The sound reverberated through the chamber, a hollow final note that seemed to rattle the trees above us. Dust billowed outward, coating my tongue with grit. My flashlight beam cut through the haze, and in that narrow cone of light, I saw it just for a second. A glimmer of something pale, curved, unnatural. Bones. I froze the air thick in my chest. Atlas growled louder now, a deep rumble that vibrated against my boots. Luna yipped once sharp and quick before falling into silence again. I felt a chill roll over my skin despite the sweat on my neck. I raised the light higher and stepped into the chamber. The ground shifted beneath me, not dirt, but something harder, flat steel plating coated in decades of grime. My boots scraped the sound, echoing in the confined space. The flashlight beam swept across the floor until it landed on the pale shapes I'd glimpsed. Two skeletons slumped forward in what might once have been seats. Rusted buckles clung to the remains of uniforms, fabric rotted into tatters. A badge long corroded clung to one chest. My throat tightened. These weren't strangers from centuries ago. They had names once. I felt the dogs behind me, Atlas pressing at my side, Luna creeping forward with hesitant steps. The air was sharp with mildew, thick enough that each breath felt weighted. I couldn't shake the sense that I was trespassing, breaking into a tomb that had been sealed for a reason. I forced myself to look closer, to examine. Shell casings scattered across the floor glinted faintly in my light. A shotgun lay against the far wall, the barrel bent, pitted with rust. The story began to form in my head: violence, desperation, a fight trapped within steel walls. My pulse quickened as I pieced it together, though every detail only deepened the mystery. Who were they? What were they guarding or running from? And why bury it here, in the silent heart of the Ozarks? Atlas barked suddenly, one sharp warning that bounced against the walls. I swung the flashlight instinctively to where his gaze was fixed. Beneath the driver's seat, half hidden in the rust and debris, something caught the light. Not bone, not steel, something smaller, deliberate. I crouched, sliding my fingers into the narrow seam. My glove brushed against metal smooth and cold. I pulled the object, wedging tight, before finally snapping free. It was a lighter. A Zippo, tarnished and grimy, its once bright casing dulled by years. I rubbed it against my thigh, revealing faint engravings. Two letters gleamed back at me through the dirt. D.M. The air seemed to collapse around me. My hand tightened around the small piece of metal until my knuckles ached. Atlas whimpered, nudging my elbow. Luna leaned against my side, eyes wide, ears back. I didn't know why, but the weight of those two initials felt like more than just a clue. It was personal, dangerous. I stood slowly scanning the chamber again. The skeletons, the shotgun, the shell casings, and now this lighter. This wasn't just an accident or some forgotten wreck. This was a crime scene sealed up and swallowed by time, the kind of secret people might kill to protect. The chamber pressed down on me, heavy with silence and the ghosts of what had happened here. My beam lingered on the skeletons, the empty sockets staring back as if daring me to leave, to walk away and let them rest. But I couldn't. Whatever truth had been buried here had chosen me, or rather chosen Atlas and Luna, who had sniffed it out of the earth like fate itself. I slid the lighter into my pocket. The weight of it was out of proportion to its size, dragging at me like a stone. My dogs circled restlessly, their instincts sharp as blades. Atlas growled at the open door. Luna's tail stayed tucked, her body pressed close to mine. They were telling me something: we weren't alone, even here. The forest outside was too quiet. I stepped back toward the door, my flashlight beam sweeping over the chamber one last time. Bones, rust, silence, and secrets heavy as iron. I breathed deep, steadying my nerves, then slipped back out into the fresh air. The forest never smelled so alive. Pines, damp earth, and cold wind rushed my lungs, washing away the stench of that tomb. Atlas leapt out behind me, Luna right at his flank. I pulled branches from the ground, scattering them loosely across the entrance. It wasn't much, but it was enough to hide the scar we'd opened. My hands shook as I worked, not from exhaustion but from knowing that the story wasn't finished. The first page had just been torn open. I looked at Atlas and Luna, both watching me closely, waiting for what came next. "We found something big," I muttered. My voice sounded strange in the stillness, as if it belonged to someone else. "And I don't think we were supposed to." Atlas tilted his head, ears sharp. Luna gave a low whine, brushing against my leg. Their presence steadied me, anchored me, against the pull of dread. Whatever came next, I wouldn't be facing it alone. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ravine. I packed up the crowbar, shouldered my gear, and began the trek back up the slope. Every step felt heavier than the last. Behind me, the hidden door remained buried beneath branches, silent once more. But I knew better. Secrets like that didn't stay buried forever. And tonight, when the silence of the Ozarks settled over my camp, I knew the real weight of what we'd found would come crashing down. I stood at the threshold, the crowbar still warm in my grip, my breath clouding in the faint light that filtered through the trees. The door gaped wide, now a wounded mouth in the earth, and the stench that poured out was almost unbearable. It clung to my clothes, burned the back of my throat, made Luna whine and press her head against my leg, as if to beg me to leave it shut. Atlas ever. The soldier stayed rigid beside me, his gaze locked on the dark opening, his body trembling with tension. I told myself I had faced worse, that the firefights overseas, the mortar blasts, the smell of burnt cordite and blood had steeled me. But this felt different. War had rules, sometimes twisted, sometimes broken, but rules all the same. This, whatever it was, had no rules. It was raw, hidden, festering. I swallowed hard, raised my flashlight, and stepped inside. The beam cut through the blackness, scattering across walls of steel scarred with rust. The space was larger than I'd imagined, taller too, like stepping into the belly of some long-dead beast. My boots crunched against the floor, and it took me a moment to realize it wasn't dirt beneath me but metal plating covered in grime. The echo of each step bounced back, hollow and accusing, as if I had no right to be here. The light swept further, and that's when I saw them. Two skeletal figures slumped in what must have been seats at the front, their bones held together by scraps of fabric that had once been uniforms. The colors were long gone, but the outlines of shoulder patches still clung to the cloth like faded ghosts. One skull had collapsed forward onto its chest, the jaw open in an eternal cry. The other leaned against the wall, empty sockets staring at the door I'd forced open, as if waiting for someone to return. I froze. My lungs wouldn't fill, as if the air itself had thickened. Atlas growled, low and steady, his ears tilted back, his body rigid. Luna whimpered, then crept closer to the skeletons, sniffing cautiously before retreating with a whine. I couldn't blame her. Even after years of combat, the sight hollowed me out. These weren't nameless bones dug up from history. They belonged to men who had sat here, breathing, talking, maybe even joking with each other, before the steel tomb closed around them. I forced myself forward, the light trembling in my hand. Shell casings littered the floor, their brass dulled and mottled by rust. A shotgun leaned against the back wall, its barrel bent as if it had been wrenched away in a struggle. The more I looked, the clearer the picture became. There had been a fight in here. Close quarters. Desperate. The walls bore scars, dents from impacts, streaks of something dark, long dried. I bent closer, raising the light. The streaks weren't just rust. They were darker, irregular, splattered across the steel like paint hurled by a frantic hand. My gut told me what my brain refused to admit. Blood. Decades old, but blood all the same. I staggered back, colliding with Atlas's solid frame. He didn't budge, just looked up at me with eyes that asked the question I was already asking myself: what the hell happened here? I crouched beside one of the skeletons, brushing away layers of mold and fabric. My glove scraped something hard. A badge corroded almost beyond recognition, but still legible if you looked close enough. I wiped it against my sleeve until faint letters appeared. Not military, not police, a private security company. That explained the uniforms, the weapons. My mind raced, stringing pieces together, though every connection only raised more questions. Luna barked suddenly, sharp and quick, making me flinch. She had her nose pressed against the base of the driver's seat, pawing at something wedged beneath it. My pulse spiked. I dropped to my knees, shining the light into the narrow seam. At first, all I saw was rust and filth. Then the faint gleam of silver. I reached in my fingertips, scraping metal. It took a minute, working the blade of my knife into the crack, prying, until the object came free. A lighter. A Zippo, tarnished and scratched, but unmistakable. I turned it over in my palm, rubbed the grime away, and there they were, two engraved letters that sent ice rushing through my veins. DM. I stood so quickly I nearly toppled. The lighter felt heavier than any weapon I had ever carried. My dogs pressed close, Luna whining, Atlas stiff as stone. The initials echoed in my head louder than the silence that pressed against the steel walls. I didn't know who DM was, but the way my stomach clenched told me this was more than coincidence. This wasn't just a relic. It was a signature, a claim. I slipped the lighter into my pocket, feeling its cold weight settle against me. My flashlight beam swept back to the skeletons. Who had they been? Guards, victims, accomplices. And if this was a robbery gone wrong, what had they been protecting or hiding that made someone willing to seal them in a steel coffin? I tried to shake it off, but the air pressed harder. The smell of mildew, rust, and death seemed stronger, suffocating. My chest ached with it. I pictured the last moments here, gunfire in the dark, shouting panic, then silence as the steel door sealed shut. And someone out there had walked away. Someone still alive once, maybe alive even now. Atlas let out a sharp bark, spinning toward the open doorway. His ears pricked his gaze, scanning the woods beyond. Luna backed against me, her tail low. I froze, every muscle tightening. I heard nothing but the pounding of my blood. But my dogs had saved me too many times for me to doubt them. I cut the beam of the flashlight, plunging us into darkness. My breathing slowed, ears straining. A twig snapped faintly outside, muffled by the thick forest. My skin prickled. Someone was out there, watching. I kept my hand on Atlas's collar, grounding both of us. Luna pressed against my other leg, trembling but ready. I didn't move until the silence returned, heavier than before. Whoever it was, they were gone, or they wanted me to think they were. I flicked the light back on the skeletons, glaring back at me, accusing. My throat tightened. This wasn't just an old crime scene buried by time. This was connected to someone who still had eyes in these woods. Someone who didn't want it found. I backed toward the door, every instinct screaming to get out. The chamber seemed to close around me, the walls pressing tighter with every step. My boots scraped against the steel floor, each sound too loud. At the threshold, I paused and looked back one last time. The skeletons sat in silence, the shotgun rusting in the corner, the shell casings glinting faintly. The blood stains, the dented walls, the initials carved into the lighter. It was all still here, waiting for me. I slipped outside, the cold air of the Ozarks hitting me like a blessing. Atlas bounded out first, circling wide, his body taut with vigilance. Luna followed, then pressed against my leg, her blue eyes wide with confusion. I dropped to one knee, resting a hand on each of their heads. We weren't supposed to see that. I muttered, my voice low, unsteady. The trees loomed silent around us, the fading sun dripping gold across the ravine. But the peace was shattered now. I could feel it in the way the forest seemed to hold its breath, in the way Atlas kept scanning the ridges, in the way Luna refused to stray more than an arm's length from me. The lighter pressed cold against my thigh, a reminder that this wasn't finished. This wasn't just the past clawing its way out of the ground. This was the present, alive and dangerous, and whoever DM was, they had left their mark for a reason. I gathered the branches I'd pulled aside earlier and dragged them back over the entrance, covering the wound in the earth as best I could. It looked the same as before, but I knew better. I'd cracked open something that would never stay buried. As I slung my pack over my shoulder, I looked at my dogs, both staring at me, waiting. We just found ourselves a problem, I said quietly. Atlas gave a short, sharp bark. Luna's ears flicked back, her body pressed close. I managed a bitter smile. Yeah, I added, my voice heavy with the weight of it. And it's not just old bones. Someone out there knows this place. And they're not going to be happy we found it. The forest closed around us as we began the climb back up the slope, the fading light bleeding into dusk. Every step felt like walking deeper into a story I hadn't asked for, one that was far from over. The weight of the lighter never left my pocket. Every step back to camp, every breath of crisp Ozark air, it was there like a stone dragging at me, whispering the same two letters over and over. D.M. I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't just a relic from the dead. It was a thread one that, if I pulled hard enough, might unravel everything. That night I barely slept. Atlas lay stretched out across the entrance of my tent, his body rigid, ears twitching at every sound. Luna curled against me, her soft whine vibrating through my ribs, as if she could sense the storm turning in my head. My dreams were jagged, broken images of the skeletons staring at me with hollow sockets, the shotgun rusting in the corner, the streaks of blood smeared across the steel, and always the lighter glowing, like a warning flare in the dark. By dawn, I had made up my mind. Hiding wasn't an option. Answers wouldn't come by staring at that tomb from a distance. If I wanted to know who DM was and why two men had died locked inside a steel coffin, I needed to step out of the trees and into the town that had grown around their silence. I drove 20 miles on back roads until the forest thinned and the valley opened up to a town called Harmony Creek. The name sounded like a joke, considering the kind of secret buried not far from its borders. Main Street was quiet. A line of red brick buildings weathered by decades, their paint fading, windows smudged by time. It was the kind of place where people nodded at strangers, but watched them a little too long, where gossip could live forever if it wasn't nailed shut. I parked in front of the library, a squat building with white trim and a flag drooping in the still air. The scent of dust and paper hit me as soon as I stepped inside. Behind the desk sat an older woman with silver hair, pinned into a bun so tight it looked painful. Her half-moon glasses perched on the end of her nose as she glanced up. The brass nameplate read, Alara Gable. "Can I help you?" she asked, her voice clipped but not unkind. I pulled on my best mask of casual curiosity. "I hope so," I said. "Name's Jonas Keene. I'm a bit of a history nut. I was wondering if you had any local newspapers archived from the 80s, maybe 85 through 90. Her eyes narrowed ever so slightly, as if testing whether I was telling the truth. Then she nodded, disappearing into the back. Moments later she returned with several boxes of microfilm. She showed me the old machine in the corner, her fingers surprisingly deft as she threaded a reel. "All yours," she said, watching me a moment longer before returning to her desk. The machine whirred as I scrolled through headlines. Weeks, months of small-town politics, high school football scores, farm equipment ads. My eyes blurred, but I forced myself to keep looking. And then, in late September of 1987, the headline punched me in the chest. Armored vehicle vanishes on rural route. I leaned closer, heart hammering. The article was brief, but brutal. A Sterling Security transport had disappeared en route to Springfield, Missouri. It carried $5 million in cash. The last radio check came just outside Harmony Creek. Then nothing. No wreckage, no ransom note, no sign of the crew or the money. The names of the two guards were printed in neat black ink. My stomach twisted. One of them was David Miller, DM. I sat back, the machine humming, my mind racing. Was the lighter his? Was he one of the skeletons in the steel tomb? Or had someone else left it there as a signature? The questions stacked higher with every turn of the reel. The following issues were worse: state police roadblocks, search parties combing the Ozarks, theories about hijackings, inside jobs, organized crime. And then, after a few weeks' silence, the headlines shrank, pushed to the back pages until they vanished altogether. The case had gone cold with unnatural speed, swallowed by time and indifference. I felt eyes on me. Looking up, I caught Alara Gable watching from her desk, her gaze sharp and knowing. She turned away quickly, pretending to straighten a stack of books. My gut told me she knew more than she'd ever say. I thanked her on my way out, tucking the memory of her stare into the growing pile of things I couldn't ignore. Outside, the streets were quiet. The kind of quiet that made you whisper even when you didn't need to. The Creekside Diner sat at the corner of Main, the smell of frying bacon drifting out the door. My stomach growled, but hunger wasn't why I went in. Places like this were the veins of small towns. Information didn't live in police reports or libraries. It lived in whispers over coffee cups. I slid into a red vinyl booth. The man who came to take my order was thick around the middle, his graying mustache bristling above a mouth that looked permanently downturned. His name tag read, Stan. His eyes sharp and guarded, flicked over me like he was cataloging a stranger's threat level. "Coffee," I said, "and a slice of that apple pie if you don't mind." He grunted, scribbled it down, and shuffled off. The men at the counter spoke in low tones, their overalls stained with grease, their boots caked in mud. But when Stan returned with my plate, I leaned back, playing the part of the harmless traveler. "Was just at the library," I said casually. "Looking into some of the old logging trails out here. Tough work, I imagine. Built this whole county." One of the men at the counter grunted without turning. "Ever any big stories out in those woods?" I pressed, keeping my tone light. "Accidents, disappearances, things folks still talk about." The effect was immediate. The low murmur at the counter stopped dead. Stan froze the rag in his hand, stilled mid-wipe. The silence that followed was heavier than anything in that steel chamber. Stan's eyes hardened. "Folks around here mostly mind their own business," he said flatly. "The woods are the woods. Best not to go looking for trouble. It's just for a history project," I tried, smiling faintly. "I read about a disappearance back in '87. An armored truck, if I'm not mistaken. That did it." Stan dropped the rag onto the counter with a sharp thud. He leaned across, his voice low, carrying an edge of finality. "We don't talk about that. Not now, not ever. You understand." His gaze pinned me in place. My instincts, the same ones that had kept me alive overseas, screamed that this wasn't just a warning. It was a line drawn in blood. I nodded slowly, pushed my plate aside, and dropped cash on the table. As I walked out, I felt every pair of eyes on my back. The sunlight outside felt harsher, the streets emptier. My truck waited at the curb, but before I climbed in, I glanced back. Stan stood in the diner doorway, arms folded, staring at me with the kind of look that promised trouble if I kept digging. I drove out of Harmony Creek, my hands tight on the wheel, the lighter pressing against my thigh like a brand. The town wasn't just quiet about the past, it was protecting it. And now they knew I was asking questions. By the time I reached the tree line, my gut was tight with the certainty I'd felt since prying open that door. This wasn't just a story buried by time. It was being buried still actively, deliberately. Someone had sealed those men in steel and sealed the town in silence. Atlas shifted in the back seat, restless, his amber eyes watching the road behind us. Luna laid her head in my lap, whining softly, as if she already knew what I was only beginning to accept. This wasn't a mystery anymore. It was a warning, and I had just stepped straight into the crosshairs. I knew the silence in Harmony Creek wasn't just about shame. It was about fear. Fear didn't last 30 years unless someone powerful was keeping it alive. The way Stan had looked at me as I left the diner told me everything. Someone would be coming, and they wouldn't be asking me nicely to leave. The drive back through the forest felt longer than it should have. Atlas paced restlessly in the truck bed. Hackles raised his gaze, darting to every shadow that passed. Luna pressed against me from the passenger seat, ears flat, her blue eyes never leaving the road behind us. When I finally pulled into camp, the air was too still, too heavy. My instincts screamed. We weren't alone. The knife was planted dead center in my table, the blade buried to the hilt, still quivering as if it had been driven in only minutes before. My stomach nodded. The message was clear. We know where you are. We can reach you. I didn't waste time. Years of soldier's muscle memory carried me through the motions. I tore down the tent, camouflaged what I could, moved the truck into cover. Atlas and Luna stayed close, silent shadows reading my urgency. By dusk, the camp was no longer a place to rest, but a forward position. My rifle lay across my knees as I sat in the dark, every nerve alive. The first sign came just after midnight, the hum of engines, low and steady, cutting through the stillness of the Ozarks. Atlas rose instantly, teeth bared, a growl rolling deep in his chest. Luna stiffened her gaze, fixed on the logging trail. Headlights flared between the trees, then cut out. The engine stopped. The silence that followed was worse. I slipped into the ravine where the steel door still yawned open, using the terrain as cover. My dogs flanked me, Atlas taking the high ground, Luna crouched low at my side. The first SUV door slammed, then another. Voices low but sharp drifted on the cold night air. 3 men, 2 were muscle. The same ones from the diner. I guessed heavy steps, rifles clattering against their gear. The third voice was different. Smooth, commanding the kind of tone that belonged to a man used to being obeyed. When they stepped into the moonlight, I saw him clearly. Silver hair, expensive coat, posture of authority, even here in the dirt. I didn't need a name tag. This was the man the town was protecting. The man who had built an empire on the backs of 2 dead guards. Daniel Murphy. Find him, Murphy ordered. His voice cut through the dark like a blade. End this tonight. My pulse hammered, but fear hardened into resolve. I had his secret in my pocket, the Zippo lighter engraved with his initials. He'd buried the truth decades ago, but here he was, chasing it down himself. That meant one thing: he couldn't trust anyone else with it. His empire was rotting, and he knew it. The goons moved forward, scanning the trees. I shifted, keeping low. Atlas barked once sharp, then lunged from the ridge. His body slammed into the first man's teeth, sinking into the rifle stock, wrenching it free. The man roared, stumbling back. Luna darted from the shadows, circling wide her speed, pulling the second man's aim off balance. Gunfire cracked, deafening in the ravine. Sparks burst from the rocks inches from my head. I rolled, brought my rifle up, and fired. The shot clipped the second man's shoulder, spinning him off his feet. Luna lunged, snapping at his wrist, dragging his weapon into the dirt. Atlas shook the first man until the rifle clattered away, then released, leaping back to guard me. That left Murphy. He stood above the chaos, his pistol drawn, eyes wild but burning with stubborn authority. "You don't know what you're doing, Keen," he shouted, his voice raw with anger. "You open this door, you tear down more than you understand. This isn't just about money, it's about power, stability. I kept this town alive." I rose from cover, my rifle trained on him. "You kept it alive with lies," I said. "With blood on your hands, those men trusted you. You sealed them in." For a heartbeat, the forest held its breath. His eyes flicked to the steel tomb, yawning behind me, then back. His jaw tightened. I did what had to be done. His pistol leveled, aimed straight at me. Atlas growled, stepping forward. Luna pressed against my leg, waiting for my command. My finger tightened on the trigger, every nerve alive, with the knowledge that this was it. The years of silence, the threats, the fear, it all came down to this. "You'll never walk out of here," Murphy spat. "Not with that lighter. Not with my name." I took one step closer, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. "Then you'd better pull that trigger, because I'm done running." He hesitated. "Just long enough." Atlas barked, the sound splitting the night, and Murphy's hand wavered. That was all I needed. I surged forward, knocking his pistol aside, as Atlas and Luna closed in their bodies, a blur of muscle and fury. Murphy hit the ground hard, his coat caked with mud, his face pale in the moonlight. His gun skittered into the dirt. I pressed the lighter against his chest, the engraved letters glinting in the faint glow. His eyes widened, fear breaking through the mask of authority. "DM," I said coldly. "You left your mark the day you killed them, and now it's going to bury you." The sound of sirens rose in the distance, faint but growing louder. Murphy's empire had finally run out of silence. The sirens grew louder, cutting through the trees like an approaching storm. Red and blue flashes bled against the darkness, bouncing off the trunks and rocks of the ravine. For the first time since I pried open that rusted door, I felt the weight lift, not all the way, but enough to breathe. Atlas stood rigid at my side, his chest rising and falling in steady bursts, while Luna pressed close, her fur damp with sweat and dirt, her blue eyes wide, and searching my face for reassurance. Murphy lay pinned in the mud, his coat torn, his mask of control shattered. The arrogance he carried in the diner, in his empire of silence, had cracked under the weight of his own initials engraved into the lighter I pressed against him. His men groaned nearby, wounded but alive, stripped of weapons and dignity by 2 dogs and a veteran who refused to look away from the truth. The first figures to break through the tree line weren't locals. They were federal FBI agents in dark jackets, rifles, raised voices sharp and commanding. For a moment, their guns were trained on me, on the sight of a mud-streaked man standing over a disgraced kingpin, I lifted my hands slow and deliberate, the lighter glinting in my palm. "He's your man," I said, nodding down at Murphy. "Daniel Murphy. The armored truck. The guards. It ends here." The agents swarmed him, their voices colliding in clipped orders. One shoved him onto his stomach, wrists locked in cuffs that clicked louder than the gunfire had. Murphy's protests were hollow, his voice breaking as he tried to spin lies no one was buying anymore. The empire he built on silence was finally collapsing under the sound of his own name. I stepped back, Atlas and Luna moving with me. The agents secured the scene, dragging the wounded men into the light, snapping photos of the steel tomb yawning open in the ravine. When they found the skeletons inside, the air changed. No one spoke for a long time. The silence wasn't fear anymore, it was respect. They had been buried, forgotten, erased. Now they had witnesses. One agent approached me, his expression caught between suspicion and gratitude. "How long have you known about this?" he asked. 2 days, I said. My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, ragged from smoke and adrenaline. "I found it with my dogs. I couldn't just walk away." He studied me, then nodded. "You did the right thing. This case has been cold for 30 years. People thought it would never see daylight again." His eyes flicked to the lighter in my hand. "But now it will." I wanted to feel relief, to let the forest air fill my lungs clean and free. But instead I felt tired, bone tired, because I knew this wasn't just about one man or one crime. It was about all the years I had spent trying to outrun the weight of war, of memories, of things buried inside me as deeply as that armored truck had been. Tonight, they had clawed their way out, and I had faced them. The agents led Murphy past me, his eyes finding mine one last time. There was no more power in them, no more control, only hatred. A bitter ember that would burn until the day he died behind bars. I didn't look away. I owed him that. When the SUVs pulled out, carrying him toward a cell and carrying the dead toward a proper burial, the forest fell quiet again. The sirens faded into the distance, swallowed by the night. Atlas leaned against my leg, his steady presence anchoring me. Luna climbed onto the truck's step, turning back to look at me, as if asking if it was finally over. I sat down hard on a fallen log, the weight of the last 2 days crashing over me. My hands shook as I pulled the lighter from my pocket one last time. D.M. The letters gleamed faintly in the moonlight, a mark of arrogance, of violence, of everything Murphy had tried to hide. I closed it tight, then slipped it into the evidence bag an agent had given me. It didn't belong to me anymore. It belonged to the men who had died in that steel coffin, and to the truth that had finally clawed its way to the surface. For years I had come to these woods looking for peace. I thought silence was the answer, that if I lived far enough away from the noise of war, I might forget it. But silence hadn't saved me. Silence hadn't saved those men. Silence had been the weapon Murphy wielded, against a whole town. It was truth, raw and painful, that had broken the spell. I looked at Atlas, at Luna, at the 2 souls who had pulled me into this. Without them I never would have found the door buried in the earth. Without them I might have walked past the truth and left it rotting in the dark. "Good work," I whispered, my throat tight. Atlas wagged his tail, once sharp and certain. Luna pressed her nose into my hand, warm and steady. As I packed my things into the truck, I felt the forest around me shift. The Ozarks would never feel the same, not after what I had pulled from their heart. But maybe that was the point. Maybe peace wasn't about forgetting or burying. Maybe it was about standing in the dark, flashlight in hand, and refusing to turn away. I climbed into the driver's seat, Atlas leaping into the bed, Luna curling against me. The road stretched out ahead, twisting and uncertain, but lighter, now that the burden of silence had been broken. I didn't know where it would lead. Maybe deeper into the hills, maybe back into the world I had left behind. But I knew this much: I wasn't running anymore. And when I finally told the story, when I spoke the names of the dead aloud, maybe the silence would stay broken for good. The night in Harmony Creek ended with sirens fading into the hills, but the echoes of what we uncovered still linger. The truth of the armored truck, the skeleton sealed in steel, and Daniel Murphy's empire of silence has finally been dragged into the light. For 30 years, fear and secrecy held this town hostage, but in the end, it only took a war veteran and 2 loyal dogs to break the chains. Yet I know, this isn't the end. Secrets buried this deep rarely come alone, and every answer seems to open another door waiting in the dark. Atlas and Luna may have helped me uncover Murphy's sins, but the question remains, who else knew? What other hands were dirty? And how far does this web of silence stretch? If you've walked this road with us tonight, let me ask you, what would you have done? Standing in front of that rusted door, would you have pried it open or left it buried? Share your thoughts below, because your voice keeps this story alive. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Our journey isn't over. The truth has a way of chasing you, and in the next chapter, you'll see just how far its shadow reaches.